Joined now by Alec Lasley from the Hoosier.com. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Can't complain. Dustin's tired of listening to it.
Exactly.
Isn't everyone?
I hear you. Indiana taking on traveling to Iowa up next, and talked about this week all that, it's going to be a very difficult thing for Indiana. You've been off for 2 weeks. You haven't played a game, and you got to go on the road. And Iowa's had been a team had been playing well, and then now they've gone into the tank here of late. They've lost back-to-back games, one of which was a biggest upset in college basketball in this century, we're finding out. So the Big Ten, and speaking of the Big Ten period, it's going to be Indiana. It's going to be Michigan. It's going to be Illinois. No, it's going to be Purdue. Everything keeps changing, which that's the fun of college basketball, of course. But man, it's been a really topsy-turvy season already in college basketball and in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it has. I mean, just talking on Iowa, right? I mean, they've struggled a lot over the last 3-4 weeks here. They've lost, even going back to kind of the start of December, right? They lost to Duke, lost to Wisconsin as well. So that they've ended up losing 3 of their last 4 of their last 6 games. They're not playing like the Iowa of old, right? They're not having the terrific shooting offenses that's kind of been the staple of Iowa basketball. Their wings are just not as talented as they have been in the past, and that's kind of masked a lot of those offensive deficiencies, especially in the backcourt. Tony Perkins and Ulis just are not as consistent as they need to be in order to kind of lift up this Iowa offense and get them out of this slump. Because as good as that front court is, it's just not going to be the same Iowa basketball without that backcourt, and that's the biggest thing. Chris Murray has been in and out of the lineup a lot over the last month, so they're still trying to kind of find some sort of a rhythm, but they just don't have the firepower that they used to have, and that's the biggest thing with Iowa. So, I mean, I think this is obviously a significant game for Indiana going up there next week, right? But Iowa still has to go to Penn State before, and that's a difficult place to play. And so you're looking at this kind of beginning of the heart of Big Ten play for Indiana. And this is turning out to be a really difficult start of Big Ten play, in my opinion, right? I mean, you go to Iowa, then you have Northwestern, and then you go to Penn State, right? Northwestern sitting up there 10-2, sitting up there at near the top of the Big Ten at the moment, right? We'll see.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that again? What was that?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think anyone ever thought we would hear that. Now, granted, right there's only been I think they're 1-0 in conference play, so obviously a little bit skewed at the moment, but still sitting there at 10-2 overall, which I don't think anyone thought they would be going into January. So that's going to be a really significant game. Obviously, that's at home for Indiana, and then they go to Penn State as well. So those first 3 games, which originally kind of looked a little bit easier on the schedule, are now going to be significant because right after that, you get really into the heart of Big Ten. You obviously have Wisconsin, who's turned out to be pretty significant in the Big Ten up to this point in the season and around the country with some notable wins. And then you have Illinois right after that and Michigan State. So it's not an easy stretch at all for Indiana. And obviously we knew that going into Big Ten play, but there's a lot of questions that Indiana really needs to answer and do so quickly with the way that they really limped through December and kind of showed that they're not the team that I think a lot of people thought they were coming into this year, and have a lot of issues, moving forward. And obviously one of those is the health of the team, with no Xavier Johnson and obviously Trace Jackson-Davis in and out of the lineup. But regardless, there's still some issues that this team needs to figure out, and especially on the offensive end.
You talk about some of the issues and some of the concerns that this team has. One of the points that was brought up earlier this week when we talked with Jeff Settles from Big Ten Network was, and something I hadn't really thought about, and I don't know if I can speak for Jim on that, but he said he almost likes the thought of bringing Race Thompson in off the bench. And so we talked with Kyler Staley about this yesterday. He doesn't necessarily agree that that's the best route to take. I mean, what would your opinion of that be? Basically, he thinks that, the argument is that the offense plays a little bit slower when both Trace and Race are on the floor together, and they don't get kind of that tempo, and they play a lot better when they're moving the ball up and down the court and more of a free-flowing offense. I mean, what is your take on that? Would you like to see Race come off the bench, or do you think the starting five right now is solidified and that's Indiana's best shot to win games?
Yeah, so I guess my question to you then is who takes over that starting four spot?
I'm not the one who said it.
I would put
either one of you, right?
Oh, four.
Yeah, like you can't play Miller Kopp at the four. He's not that's not his position. Obviously, ideally, you'd like to have Malik Renaud or Jordan Geronimo take over that. Ideally, Jordan Geronimo with that versatility that he has, but obviously he's not showing up.
Those are two really different players right there.
Exactly, but you can't play either one of those because neither one of those guys have showcased the ability to, one, be consistent, but two, be productive in the last month and a half, right? So what are you going to do? I think at this point, there's no reason to change a starting lineup. I think a lot of people are obviously wanting Tamar Bates in that starting two spot. But I look at it as you obviously have kind of lost that production from your front court coming off the bench. You now bring in Trey Galloway off the bench into that starting lineup. Your bench, if you take Tamar Bates off of that bench unit has turned into nothing at this point. And that was one of the strengths of the team, I would say, coming into the season and through the first 3-4 weeks. And if you don't have any scoring punch off of the bench, and just hypothetically, let's say Jalen Hood-Schifino or Tamar Bates get in foul trouble early on, who are you bringing in? Who's going to take over that scoring in the backcourt, right? There's no reason to bring him into that starting lineup when you can still play him 31 minutes a game if you really want. Obviously, talking about Tamar Bates here, coming off the bench. The biggest thing is who closes out the games. Obviously, Indiana needs to start better, but I don't think the answer is bringing Tamar Bates in because he's in such a good rhythm right now. I don't know why you would want to, change that up in any manner. I think the bigger issue is figuring out this front court and figuring out a way for Trayce Jackson-Davis to, one, stay on the floor, be healthy, raise his level of play, which has dipped dramatically over the last month, and get something more out of that backup front court in Jordan Geronimo and Malik Renaud. Because if you don't, then it doesn't matter what you do with Tamar Bates because the bigs are still not going to be able to play 33, 34, 35 minutes a game like this backcourt could. And so you need some sort of production from those two guys off of the bench in that reserve front court role.
So let me interject this question because maybe it's too early to tell, but through 13 games, I think it's fair to say that Indiana is not good in the first 5 to 8 minutes of a basketball game. I mean, that's some teams start slow and they've found ways to win games. They've played much better in the second half. So I agree with you on that front. And it's who finishes the game. If these poor starts continue, though, would you then make the change, or because I think the thing that interests me about bringing in Tamar Bates and putting him in the starting role is you get off to a faster start, and then you're not digging yourself out of that hole. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. Number one, they need scoring off the bench. They need somebody off the bench to help that second unit. The other part is you don't want to get him out of a rhythm. So if he's uncomfortable in that starting role, is he still going to be the same player in a starting role as he is off the bench? But to me, if there's, and again, 13 games, we've noticed a little bit of a trend, but now you're getting to the games where it really matters, right? Like you're competing for a Big Ten championship. So if you get 3 or 4 games in and you're still finding yourself in this position, to me, I would at least experiment with it and see what happens.
Yeah. So that's a different conversation, right? If this continues in the next 3-4 games, I still think that there's a much easier solution, and that's tweaking the offense a little bit. Right, Mike Woodson has not done a good job at all, and I think adjusting to the players on his roster, at least through the first 13 games here. We obviously saw what it looked like the past 2 games, which was allow those.
That's also a pattern, though. We saw the same thing last year. There was no adjustment whatsoever. Same players, same thing.
There was, though, at the end of the year. And that was regardless of what Race Thompson and Trayce Jackson-Davis were doing, you had both of those guys in almost every single minute of that game, right? And you still ran high ball screen after high ball screen after high ball screen. And that was extremely successful, getting those guards into the paint, especially Xavier Johnson. Now, obviously, I think that the two best scorers on this team right now are Jalen Hood-Schifino and Tamar Bates. I don't think there can be that big of a disagreement with that through the last month of the season here. The ball needs to be in those two players' hands because they can create shots for this team. The easiest way to create shots is a high ball screen. And then you can roll one of those big guys off. Race Thompson done a much better job hitting threes over the last 4, 5, 6 games. There's no reason that you –
I would disagree with that. He had one good game.
He's gone from the first 8 games of the season from shooting 12.5% to the last 5 shooting 43.5%, and he's still making over one.
I know,
game.
But if you take the Arizona game out, what is it?
But he still made one in I think the last 3 out of the last 5 games.
But he shouldn't be shooting those. I don't think he needs to be shooting 3-pointers. If you need Race Thompson shooting threes, then your team is screwed already. You're already screwed if that's the guy that's shooting the 3 ball for you. I'm in such disagreement with that. But
we just talked about how there's no production in that front court off of the bench. So if you have to have him on the floor, you need him to stretch the floor a little bit. And it's not he doesn't need to take. He's taken 4.5 threes a game. A lot of that is influenced by the Arizona game where I think he took 5 or 6, right? But
7.
There you go. So all you need to do is have him take 2 or 3 a game. He's shown he's going to make those eventually, and he's shown now in the last 4 or 5 games that he can make those. You just cannot run your offense through Trayce Jackson-Davis. That's not going to be the recipe for success for this team. So you need to have Trayce Jackson-Davis come up on ball screens and get these guards going downhill, because when they do, they're quick enough, they're strong enough, and they're smart enough to be able to create their own shots in the paint, but also distribute that ball to a shooter like Miller Kopp, who's now obviously shown he's one of the best shooters in the Big Ten this season. You also have Tamar Bates, who's one of the best shooters in the Big Ten this season. Both of those guys are fantastic on the wing, shooting the ball in the corner. So if you have Jalen Hood-Schifino on a ball screen going downhill, either he's going to get to the rim, get fouled, going to get to the rim, miss, but you have a rolling Trayce Jackson-Davis to clean that up, or you bring over the help side defense and then you kick it out to one of those 2 players for a wide open 3. If they can't make that shot, right, that's on them, but the offense is doing what it's supposed to do. The conversation of changing up the lineup, I think, is an easy way out to say that Mike Woodson has not done a good job at orchestrating a good offensive system. And that needs to be the point of emphasis going into Big Ten play here, of how these guards and Tamar Bates and Jalen Hood-Schifino can take 22, 23 shots a game, because that's the only way this offense is going to create easy opportunities if they're not going to push the tempo, which I think is another conversation, which they should be doing a lot more of, especially if this defense is supposed to be as good as it can be, which it obviously hasn't been over the last month.
And that's the thing. The defense has taken such a step down from last year with mostly the same players. And when we talk about having Miller Kopp and Race Thompson and Trayce Jackson-Davis on the floor at the same time, to me, I wrote that equals very slow defense. Those guys are always chasing. Every time you look up, they're chasing. I think Race Thompson has given up more made 3-pointers in the history of college basketball. Every time you turn around, it's like he's coming from 6 feet away to swipe at something for a guy to knock one down. And we talk about the offense and what they could do there, but if they don't fix the defense, it doesn't really matter unless you're scoring 100 points a game, what you do offensively.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, right, we saw, especially against Kennesaw State, their ability to beat Indiana's perimeter players off of the dribble. I think that's been a huge issue over the last 2 years, and Indiana loves to overhelp. That's good at some point, but at the other point, you just need to be able to guard your guy one-on-one and understand that 2s are better than 3s, right, for defensive purposes. And you also have a guy like Trayce Jackson-Davis, who is a fantastic shot blocker, one of the best in the entire country, coming off of the post and helping. If you bring him off, that he masked a lot of issues that Indiana had defensively last year. But for some reason, they've decided to help more off of the wing than they have off of the post. And maybe that's because the offenses are a little bit more spread out that Indiana's played against this year. But at a certain point, it comes down to guys like Jalen Hood-Schifino, Tamar Bates, Miller Kopp, and Trey Galloway and their ability to keep guys in front of them. If they're not able to do that, then it doesn't matter what the rest of this defense looks like, because that's where it starts. And in college and in NBA, basketball in general, if you're able to get into the middle and the heart of that defense, your defense is going to collapse and be horrendous for those possessions. So, Indiana's still a good team, right? But there's a lot of issues that they need to work through. And hopefully these 13 days, the time off gives them a nice little bit of rest. But these 13 days do more, I think, mentally for them to get a little reset after a really deflating December.